Hello, I'm going to tell you a story of failure, a collective failure. I think we would have a healthier society if we supported and respected women a whole lot more. And I believe I'm a living example of that. I know it sounds arrogant, but in this world, we have to advocate for ourselves and share our successes in order to get resources and survive. I prefer humility and advocating for other people, but here we are. I'm adapting to the world we're living in. In 2017, I started a social enterprise. It was a business with social aims. It was a business because I believe we have to use capitalist mechanisms to succeed before we can create the change we want to see. The focus was on getting people of different backgrounds to eat together. It was born out of a frustration that people were not changing their behaviour around climate change, and a recognition that we need to create the environment for that change to happen first before we can expect any change in behaviour. The big vision was to create a new type of community space that operated like a private members club and somehow be subsidised so that it was affordable for everyone. The focus was on getting people of different backgrounds to eat together and providing a daily meal based on a sustainable diet, because changing your diet is one of the best things you can do for the environment, and it's also a very hard thing to change. Food is a great connector, and I think the biggest reason we're unable to tackle wider social issues, such as climate change, is because of our highly polarised society. So this concept addressed those two things. In 2025, I think it's fair to say that those same issues, lack of community, social polarisation, and climate instability, are even more urgent. So what if I'd have succeeded back then? I'm not saying everything would be different, but possibly I could have made at least a small impact in my local area. I could have inspired someone else to start a similar project, and potentially that could have had a wider ripple effect. Crucially, I know there are lots of other people doing similar things and failing for similar reasons. So that's why I'm talking about it now. I'm hoping we can all learn something from the failure, because I do believe it's a collective and systemic failure. The vision I had was pretty big, so instead of aiming for that, I started small. I ran supper clubs, like a pop-up restaurant. I invited sustainable food brands to come to the events, and usually they would send a representative who would give a short talk about their product. For example, fruit jerky made from fruit that would ordinarily be thrown away, or honey, because producing honey helps bees if you do it in the right way, and bees are crucial for our survival. Well, one time we did crayfish, because American crayfish are an invasive species and they are decimating our waterways. Oftentimes the food was vegan, and I achieved an awful lot when I started with absolutely nothing. For my first event, 3 people came. It was at a friend's house, and I bought all the ingredients with a credit card. Around about 6 months later, I had a supper club in a local cafe. And shortly after that, I managed to convince 2 amazing chefs to come and work with me. One did the fine dining at Deutsche Bank, very good. And the other was a former semi-finalist on MasterChef. I almost did an event with Oddbox, and I was talking to a franchisee from Riverford, which would have been a great partnership. If you've watched any of my earlier videos, I also nearly met my food idol, Geeti Singh Watson. Alongside this, I started a version of the actual canteen that we wanted it to grow into by running a less fancy regular event in a local church hall. So why did it fail? Let me explain. When I started the business, I had a 7-month-old baby. So I did all of that while raising my first child with very little childcare. Motherhood didn't come particularly easily to me, so when I look back on it, that was a pretty superhuman effort. Alongside this, I had a husband who could not provide any meaningful support. Very little emotional support or encouragement, and he could not take responsibility for domestic tasks, no matter how many times I asked or how many lists I wrote. This is the reason we're no longer together. In addition to this, I have a massive extended family, and my husband's family is pretty big too. I ran 10 supper clubs over the course of 2 years, and not even one time did anyone in my family even suggest that they would want to come to an event, let alone actually come. Now, I get that they don't all live in London, but it was more the lack of interest that hurt, particularly as, alongside that, most people wouldn't even like, share or comment on any of my posts to help me get engagement, even when I asked them to do that. I also had to ask my husband to do that. He could not, of his own accord, do something supportive. Alongside this, I had a lot of passive-aggressive comments about how I should be at home with my son. I had well-meaning people tell me they thought it was a bit much. People making fun of me and being very dismissive when I tried to explain what I was doing. And I also had what I can only describe as an unusual response when I talked about what I was doing, especially when I suggested I needed help. For example, one time a family member asked me how it was going. When I said that it was hard, he scoffed at me and said, "Well, why are you doing it if it's so hard?" And it's not so much what he said, it was the scorn in his voice that shocked me. So I think the lack of support that I received is down to a really, really deep, ingrained cultural and unconscious belief that we see women as resources to care for children, to cook and clean, rather than people deserving of resources. For me, this was particularly acute because I come from a very traditional family, traditional values and somewhat religious. It's really hard to be a leader when you've been raised to be submissive. Something that helped me come to that conclusion is, remember I said no one in my family came to any of my events? Interestingly, a couple of years before I started, my male cousin held his own supper club. Just the one. 3 members of his family went, along with their partners, and I also went with my husband to show support. So why couldn't anyone do the same for me? I'm saying all of that to explain that we all have an impact through our behaviour. It's cause and effect. People aren't failing and society isn't failing because of a lack of skills and determination. It's a lack of collaboration. If we want a healthier society, we need to support the people who are capable of bringing that about. That is definitely not exclusive to women. However, if we want to create a society more focused on looking after people, it would be a good idea to support women, because we have literally been socially conditioned to look after people. You would likely see really good positive outcomes by investing in women. And I'm not just talking about money. It's all kinds of investment. Your time, your energy, really thinking about what the women in your life need, instead of just treating us as people to look after you and fulfill your needs. And that's a message as much for other women as for men.